To a lot of people, World War II will begin when Germany invades Poland in September 1939. But what does the invasion of one European nation by another mean to the people halfway across the world who come to be equally implicated in the coming global conflict? A far more important date to the people of Eastern Asia is July 1937, when China and Japan, after years of conflict, finally go head-to-head in all-out conventional warfare. Mass bloodshed will follow, and the fighting will one day expand to engulf the entire Pacific. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Neidell. Last time we looked at Japan, in 1931 and 1932, the Kwantung Army had occupied the northeastern Chinese region of Manchuria in a matter of just 5 months. This is pretty impressive when you consider that that territory is bigger than France, Germany, and Austria combined. But the swift victory does not mean the violence ends. In fact, just as the fighting in Manchuria seems to be wrapping up, the military look for an excuse to open another front in Shanghai. They have two motives here: draw Western attention away from Manchuria and force a favorable settlement with the Chinese nationalists by threatening their financial center. They engineer their chance January 18, 1932, by getting agents working for the Imperial Japanese Army to whip up a Chinese mob to kill 2 Japanese nationals. Things deteriorate from there, and full-scale fighting soon breaks out on the 28th. The battle is more or less over by March, but violence continues until an official ceasefire in May. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians lie dead, and much of the city is in ruins. But the violence does little to deter the Kwantung Army as they begin to strengthen their grip on Manchuria. You are probably wondering why the Japanese military are so hell-bent on securing the region. The worldwide economic depression and the rising power of the USSR has convinced Japanese leaders that Japan must practice autarky, economic self-sufficiency. A Manchuria in a destabilized China with the specter of communism to the north is far too risky a proposition. If the region is directly under Japanese control, then its vast industrial potential can be used to serve the empire's needs exclusively. But with the eyes of the world upon them, and a government at home not exactly happy about that invasion, army generals know they cannot make this too explicit. Instead, they proclaim the state of Manchukuo as a new independent republic in March 1932. They install the last emperor of China's Qing dynasty, Hu Yi, as the head of state and use pan-Asian rhetoric to argue that Manchukuo is founded upon the motto of Gozuku Kyowa, the harmony of the 5 races. Japanese, Korean, Han Chinese, Manchurian, and Mongolian will all live side by side here and will be represented in the colors of the new republic's flag. In reality, this is little more than an illusion. All power rests with the Japanese elite. So much so that historian Yamamuro Shinichi will call Manchukuo a concentration camp state. At first, the Japanese government abstains from recognizing Manchukuo. The military's answer? Stage a coup and give all power to Emperor Hirohito. On May 15th, Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi is shot dead by 11 young naval officers in his own home. The plotters also hope, actually, to dispatch Charlie Chaplin, the famous American actor, who is currently on a visit to Japan. The idea is that his murder will spark a war between Japan and the US. But luckily for Chaplin, he's been watching a sumo match with Inukai's son, and he escapes the bloodshed. And overall, the coup mostly fails, and Japan's kind of democracy survives. But the new government formed in the wake of Inukai's death is much more closely aligned with the military's ideals, and it does officially recognize Manchukuo in September. All of this obviously draws the ire of the international community. When hostilities broke out in 1931, the League of Nations had sent a group of diplomats on a fact-finding mission. Led by Victor Bulwer-Lytton, the Lytton Commission publishes its report in October 1932 and rejects Japan's claim that it has been acting in self-defense. Japan is not happy. The head of the country's delegation to the League, Matsuoka Yosuke, offers a fiery response in December, stating that humanity crucified Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago. Japan stands ready to be crucified, but we do believe and firmly believe that in a very few years, world opinion will be changed, and that we also shall be understood by the world as Jesus of Nazareth was. In further defiance, the army invades the province of Rehe in January 1933 to secure the region north of the Great Wall. Unintimidated, the League votes in February to officially denounce Japan's actions. In protest, the Japanese delegation walks out of the session. A few weeks later in March, the country confirms what everybody knew was coming and officially withdraws from the League. Now, it was formerly one of the most active members of the international community, but it will now begin a long period of isolation. But the lack of any decisive action from the League means that China is also pretty alone. It isn't really in any position to fight back at this point. The vast country has been paralyzed by civil war since 1927, and the leader of the government side, Chiang Kai-shek, has been following a policy of what he calls internal pacification before external resistance. Even before the invasion of Manchuria, Chiang stated that if we do not first annihilate the Red Bandits, meaning communists, and restore the people's capacity for survival, we will be unable to resist foreign aggression. So his plan then is to do everything he can to appease Japan without signing away sovereignty. Meanwhile, he hopes that he can destroy the communist threat and build a modern army to one day fight against Japan head on. It is not exactly a well-liked strategy, and, well, the communists especially sneer at it. They claim instead that they will fight both Japan and Chiang at the same time. But that's mainly bluster. Chiang knows that for now he cannot defeat the Imperial Japanese military. And this is only confirmed when an emboldened Kwantung army begins fighting a campaign to bring the entire Great Wall under its control. They break through in April and move into Hebei province. Chiang sues for peace, and the two sides sign the Tangku Truce May 31st, 1933. The truce is a humiliation for China. Not only is Chiang forced to accept the existing front lines as demarcation lines, Japanese control of the Great Wall and everything north of it, but also a demilitarized zone stretching 100 kilometers south of the wall. No Chinese regulars can enter the region, but Japan can send in reconnaissance aircraft and ground patrols to ensure the agreement is respected. Both sides know the truce is not a permanent solution, and the Japanese military will continually reinterpret the provisions to continue its expansion in the coming years. But with the fighting over, well, officially at least, the Japanese military can turn towards cementing their regime in Manchuria, Manchukuo, itself. Investment and industrial development now goes into overdrive. The Manchukuo government, meaning Japan, begins nationalizing the railways and builds thousands of kilometers of new lines. The Japanese invest heavily in the mining industry. Huge companies like Mitsui and Mitsubishi build numerous factories, and they produce everything from bricks to processed food to chemicals. In 1934, the Kwantung Army decides that Manchukuo declares Puyi as Manchukuo's emperor. This changes pretty much nothing, however. The chain of command runs down from the Kwantung Army, with Puyi only being used to announce Japanese policies publicly. Despite the harmony of the five races narrative, Japanese nationals hold virtually all senior positions in the government, the police force, and the army. They have the highest wages. They can get away with not paying rent to non-Japanese landlords, and some even demand to be bowed to in the streets. Okay, so you may be wondering why the Japanese military have so much power. Well, if you watched our 1931 episode on Japan, you will know that the military is constitutionally independent from the civilian government, so they have free reign to do whatever they want. and we already know that they are more than willing to get rid of any politicians who might get in their way. As the years progress, assassinations of critical voices become endemic, and civilian politicians steadily lose influence in government. This reaches its climax on February 26, 1936, when a group of junior army officers stage yet another coup. One of its primary targets is veteran finance minister Takahashi Korekiyo, who has been doing everything he can to rein in military spending and imperial expansion. Prime Minister Okada Keisuke is also targeted, but he narrowly escapes. Across the next 4 days, many high-ranking politicians are eliminated, and insurgents occupy key government buildings and the Tokyo police headquarters. Similar to the 1932 coup, the plotters hope to install a military dictatorship under the reign of the emperor. But Hirohito is furious and expresses a clear desire to see the coup put down. The military establishment crushes the rebels. Another coup has failed, but it will have far-reaching effects. All hopes of reining in the military have disappeared. The new cabinet that is formed in the aftermath sees unprecedented interference from generals who handpick the politicians. It pays off. In 1937, military spending accounts for a whopping 46% of the government's entire budget. The Japanese military is looking as strong as ever, but things are also changing in China. Chiang's resolve to take on the Japanese has been growing and growing. By 1935, he seems to have finally defeated most of the Chinese warlords and has also driven the communists to the remote northwest. Have a look at our video on Mao's Long March if you want to know more about that. Anyhow, aided by the somewhat surprising ally of Nazi Germany, he's been creating an army and an industrial base capable of fighting a modern war. He is at the height of his popularity, and the international politics of communism are about to turn in his favor. Kind of. Already in this series, we've seen how the USSR has been advocating popular fronts against the fascist surge. They push even harder for this in October 1936, when Japan signs the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany and Italy. The Chinese nationalists and communists immediately begin secret negotiations about a united front. Chiang is still reluctant. Frustrated, 2 of his own generals kidnap him in December and demand he make peace with the communists. He agrees and forms an uneasy alliance upon his release. As 1937 rolls around, Chiang knows that China is not quite ready for war, but he also knows that appeasing Japan much longer is not likely, and he is given hope by 2 assets he believes China now has for the first time. Number 1 is the new patriotic feeling among the population. Now, he's always thought that the key to Japan's success has been its people's fanatical national devotion. For Chiang, the alliance with the communists means that the Chinese too now have such fiery commitment. And number 2 is the alliance with a significant power who can supply arms and maybe even men. He knows that Germany is a pretty insecure ally, but the communist partnership gives him a direct line to Moscow and the industrial might of the Soviet Union. This new resolve probably explains why he refuses to back down in July 1937, when a small incident once again heightens tensions. On the night of the 7th, near the Marco Polo Bridge crossing the Yongding River on the southwestern outskirts of Beijing, a Japanese company are carrying out a routine training exercise in Chinese territory without notifying the Chinese. A local Chinese garrison sees the Japanese and believes that they're under attack. Shots are fired, and a Japanese soldier goes missing in the confusion. The Japanese demand to search the Chinese garrison. They are refused, and fighting breaks out. The Japanese call in reinforcements and assault Chinese positions. By this point, the missing soldier turns up unharmed, but it is already too late. Chinese officers have decided this time they will not back down, and Chiang agrees. The Second Sino-Japanese War has begun. A few days after this incident, the Japanese war minister informs the emperor that everything will be resolved in a month. Flushed with victories stretching as far back as the First Sino-Japanese War, The military sees no reason why China will not be put down quickly. But they have not taken account of Chiang's near suicidal defensive strategy. China is 35 times larger than Japan and has 7 times the population. For Chiang, this means his country has an extremely high pain threshold. He plans to draw Japan into a deadly stalemate that they cannot maintain, forcing them to settle for peace. Chiang's gamble is tested when Japan unleashes its offensive July 28th. Beijing is occupied in 1 day, and so is Tianjin 2 days later. One force pushes into the industrial center of Wuhan, and another towards the capital of Nanjing. Chiang counters this by opening another front in Shanghai in August, where his best forces are concentrated. On the 14th, the city turns into a slaughterhouse. For the next 3 months, 500,000 troops engage in brutal hand-to-hand fighting while artillery pounds and bombers rage overhead. Meanwhile, Joseph Stalin comes through as an ally, delivering planes, artillery, weapons, and ammunition in quantities worth billions of dollars by 21st century standards. But it does little to halt the Japanese onslaught. Provincial capitals collapse one after the other in the autumn and winter. Shanghai falls in November with staggering losses. 9,115 Japanese soldiers and 187,200 Chinese soldiers have lost their lives on the streets of Shanghai. 70% of Chiang's junior officers have died. By 1938, the fighting across China will have decimated most of China's main forces. And to the shock of the entire world, Japan uses poison gas and germ warfare on Chinese soldiers and civilians alike. Gas is used at least 13 times in the Battle of Shanghai. The Japanese have created a special department for biological warfare within the Kwantung Army under the disingenuous name, the Epidemic Prevention Department. Now, it's led by Dr. Shiro Ishii. In Manchuria, they develop biological weapons by experimenting on live, healthy human subjects, POWs, and captured civilians. This unit will eventually become Unit 731 and will continue to play a very dark role in World War II history, and the weapons are now put to the test on the battlefield, with anthrax, typhoid, and cholera being airdropped onto armies and cities. Peace negotiations mediated by Germany are ongoing, but Japan's autumn successes convince their leaders that it can soon break the will of the Chinese by pushing on to Nanjing. Japan's military leaders are obsessed with Bushido, the code of the samurai, which sees willpower as the centerpiece of warfare. If the Chinese will can be broken, Japan will win. With this in mind, Japanese soldiers are given orders to treat all Chinese as belligerents. Homes, whole towns are burnt, and women and girls are raped en masse. By December, the army reaches the end of its bloody road at Nanjing. By the 10th, Japanese troops have begun their massive assault. Chiang and his generals flee the city, leaving it to surrender on December 13th. Many residents are relieved. They've been continuously bombed since August, and poverty and crime have become a fact of life. But events outside the city gates will soon change this. Thousands upon thousands of Chinese POWs are executed on the spot. Many of them are reportedly taken to the Yangtze River, where machine gun fire is unleashed upon them from all sides. The captured face either bullets or drowning, and any ones who survive are bayoneted by Japanese soldiers digging through the pile of bodies. We do not know how many POWs are murdered there, but there is no doubt it is in the tens of thousands at least. And it doesn't stop there. Over the next 6 weeks, Japanese troops carry out a terror that still baffles historians to this day. Merely walking on the street can get you killed, and not just by being shot. Japanese units are rounding up hundreds of civilians who they force to dig mass graves before bayoneting or beheading them. And it doesn't stop there. Chinese civilians are sprayed with gasoline and set ablaze, buried alive in mass graves, or thrown into the Yangtze to drown. Children are not spared, and tens of thousands of women are raped and mutilated often to the point of death. In 1938, the world doesn't know how costly the events at Nanjing are. Japanese government sources downplay the statistics, claiming no more than a little over 1,000 dead. Once the war has finished, the Chinese Communist government will excavate the site and, to spur nationalist sentiment, exaggerate the number to at least 300,000. Modern-day historians estimate the amount to be around 200,000. Regardless of the exact amount, one thing is sure. For 6 weeks, Japanese troops turned Nanjing into a very literal slaughterhouse. But what will become known as the Rape of Nanking fails in its objective. Rather than destroy their will, atrocities such as this simply serve to strengthen the Chinese resolve to fight. Over the next few years, the war will settle into a stalemate. More atrocities on both sides will follow, and Japan will continue to use its deadly weapons of chemical and biological warfare. The fighting will bring the Japanese economy to its knees. In desperation, the generals will expand the battle into the Pacific to isolate the Chinese and grab desperately needed resources. The outcome of this will one day be war with the United States and the eventual destruction of the Japanese army. When the conflict began at the Marco Polo Bridge in 1937, it was by no means a world war. But to the people of Eastern Asia, from here begins the snowballing of events that will create a colossal global conflict on a scale never before seen. Come 1945, it will be the Japanese civilians who will experience the real horrors of total war that their generals have now unleashed. If you'd like to learn more about Shiro Ishii and what he's doing with biological agents, check out our 4 first War Against Humanity episodes right here in a little while. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Bertrand Belair. It's because of people like Bertrand, Belair I guess, that we can continue producing such in-depth historical coverage, so please join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. The war effort needs you. Now, think carefully, right? Think carefully of the Zen saying, the one who is good at shooting does not hit the center of the target. Kanpai. See you next time.